The restaurant manager's voice cut through the Memorial Day dinner crowd like a blade. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." What he didn't know was that the quiet man in the faded uniform had just received the highest military honor possible, and within minutes, 400 of his brothers in arms would be pulling into the parking lot. 68-year-old Master Sergeant Richard "Rick" Castellano sat alone at table 12, his Medal of Honor ceremony program folded neatly beside his untouched burger. The blue ribbon around his neck caught the restaurant's harsh fluorescent lighting as he looked up at the approaching manager. "Is there a problem?" Rick asked quietly, his voice carrying the measured tone of a man who'd commanded respect in foxholes from Fallujah to Kandahar. "Several problems," manager Brad Hoffman replied, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "First, that costume you're wearing is inappropriate for a family establishment. Second, you've been nursing that one beer for over an hour. This isn't a homeless shelter." The conversations at neighboring tables died. A family with 2 young children turned to stare. An elderly couple stopped eating their dessert. Rick glanced down at his dress blues, the same uniform he'd worn to the White House 3 hours earlier. The same uniform in which the President of the United States had placed the nation's highest military decoration around his neck. "It's not a costume," Rick said evenly. "I'm a United States Marine." Brad snorted. "Right. And I'm the Pope. Look, buddy, I've seen real military guys. They don't shop at thrift stores for their uniforms. That thing looks like it came from a Halloween shop." The uniform was indeed old, Rick admitted to himself. 35 years of service had required several tailoring adjustments as his body aged and changed. The fabric showed wear at the elbows and collar. But every ribbon, every medal, every insignia had been earned in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. "Sir, I understand you're busy," Rick began, "but if you could just—" "No, you understand something," Brad interrupted, stepping closer. His voice rose another notch. "This is Memorial Day. A day to honor real heroes. Not wannabes who dress up and come looking for free drinks and sympathy." A woman at the next table gasped. Her husband started to stand, but she pulled him back down. "I've served my country for 35 years, Rick said, his hands remaining steady on the table despite the growing tension. "Served what?" "Served yourself to free handouts." Brad was enjoying the attention now, playing to his audience. "You think slapping on some medals from eBay makes you special? You think it makes you a hero?" Rick's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The Medal of Honor felt suddenly heavy around his neck. "I don't think it makes me anything," Rick replied. "But this is a public restaurant, and I'm a paying customer." "Barely paying. 1 beer in an hour. You're taking up space that real customers could use. Customers who actually have money to spend." The restaurant had gone completely quiet now. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye was on the confrontation. "Look at you," Brad continued, warming to his theme. "Probably some homeless vet who thinks putting on a uniform entitles him to special treatment. Well, not in my restaurant. We support the troops here, but that means real troops. Not pretenders." Rick slowly reached into his jacket pocket. Brad stepped back quickly, and Rick realized the manager thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, Rick pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Brad demanded. "Making a phone call," Rick said simply. "To who?" "Your other homeless buddies. The Stolen Valor Police." Brad laughed at his own joke. Rick dialed a number from memory and waited. When someone answered, he spoke quietly, "Gunny, it's Rick. I'm at Murphy's Grill on Harbor Boulevard. I could use some backup." He hung up and placed the phone on the table. "Backup?" Brad mocked. "This isn't a war zone, old man. This is a restaurant, and you're leaving. Now." "I'll wait," Rick said calmly. "For what?" "For my friends." Brad turned to address the restaurant crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. We're dealing with someone who clearly has mental health issues. We'll have him removed shortly. Several customers looked uncomfortable. A teenager at a corner booth was filming with his phone. You want to know what's really sick? Brad continued, getting bolder. It's guys like this who make real veterans look bad. Who take advantage of people's patriotism for free meals and handouts. Rick said nothing, but his fingers found the medal around his neck. He thought about the ceremony earlier that day. About the president's words, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. He thought about Corporal Martinez, who hadn't made it home from that ambush in Helmand Province. About the roadside bomb that had killed 3 of his Marines while Rick was in surgery, fighting for his own life. You know what really gets me? Brad was addressing the whole restaurant now. It's Memorial Day. A sacred day. And this fraud shows up trying to cash in on the sacrifice of real heroes. That's when Rick heard it. The distant rumble of motorcycles. Brad heard it too and glanced toward the windows. The sound was getting louder. Sounds like a biker rally, someone at the bar commented. The rumbling grew to a roar. Through the large windows, customers could see the first motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. Then more. Then more. What the hell? Brad muttered. The motorcycles kept coming. Harley-Davidsons, Indians, sport bikes, touring bikes. Riders in leather, riders in uniform, riders with patches and flags and veteran insignia covering their jackets. The restaurant staff pressed against the windows. Customers stood up from their tables. There must be 50 of them, a waitress whispered. The motorcycles kept arriving. The parking lot was filling up, then overflowing into the street. The thunder of engines was overwhelming. More like 100, someone corrected. But they kept coming. The first riders had dismounted and were walking toward the restaurant entrance. Rick could see Gunnery Sergeant Mike "Gunny" Rodriguez leading them, still wearing his dress blues from the ceremony. Behind him came faces Rick recognized from 35 years of service, from deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, from ceremonies and funerals and reunions. They weren't all Marines. Rick spotted Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Air Force Pararescue, Coast Guard veterans. Men and women he'd served with, trained with, bled with. The restaurant door opened, and Gunny Rodriguez entered first. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", and built like a tank, with hands that had carried wounded Marines to safety in Ramadi. Rick, he said simply, and Rick stood up. Behind Gunny came the others. They filled the restaurant entrance, then the dining area. Combat veterans, Purple Heart recipients, Bronze Star holders, Silver Star recipients. Some were in uniform, some in motorcycle leathers, some in civilian clothes. But they all carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of professional warriors. Brad Hoffman had gone pale. The restaurant was now packed with over 100 veterans, with more still arriving outside. Is there a problem here? Gunny asked, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in the Corps. Brad stammered, we were just, this man was. This man, interrupted a voice from the crowd, is Master Sergeant Richard Castellanos, United States Marine Corps. 35 years of service. 3 Purple Hearts. 2 Bronze Stars. Silver Star. And as of 3 hours ago, Medal of Honor recipient. The voice belonged to Colonel Sarah Chen, Rick's former commanding officer, now retired. She pushed through the crowd, still wearing her dress blues from the White House ceremony. He received the nation's highest honor today for actions in Afghanistan, where he single-handedly held off enemy forces for 6 hours while calling in medevac for wounded Marines under his command. He saved 17 lives that day. The restaurant was dead silent except for the continuing rumble of motorcycles still arriving outside. Brad's face had gone from pale to red. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, said another voice. Master Chief Petty Officer James Washington, Navy SEAL, stepped forward. You saw an older man in a worn uniform and assumed he was fake. How many Marines died so you could have the freedom to run this restaurant? Asked Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, Army Rangers. How many soldiers gave their lives so you could insult their brothers on Memorial Day? Brad was looking around frantically now, realizing he was surrounded by several hundred combat veterans who were not pleased with him. Look, I made a mistake, he began. You made a choice, corrected Gunny Rodriguez. You chose to humiliate a Medal of Honor recipient on Memorial Day in front of a room full of families. Through the windows, customers could see the parking lot was now completely full. Veterans were still arriving, parking on the street, walking from blocks away. The crowd inside the restaurant had grown to over 200, with more waiting outside. Do you see that man's ribbon rack? Colonel Chen pointed to Rick's chest. Each one of those ribbons represents service to this country. Combat tours, wounded in action, meritorious service. 35 years of putting his life on the line for people like you. Rick finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. Stand down, Marines. The room turned toward him. This man made a mistake, Rick continued, looking at Brad. We all make mistakes. The difference is, we learn from them. Gunny Rodriguez stepped forward. Rick, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Rick looked around the room at his brothers and sisters in arms. This is what we fought for. The right to be wrong. The right to learn. The right to be better. He turned to Brad, who was visibly shaking now. Mr. Hoffman, I don't want an apology. I want you to understand something. Every person in this room volunteered to serve. We didn't do it for recognition. We didn't do it for special treatment. We did it because freedom isn't free, and someone has to pay the price. The restaurant was absolutely silent. We did it so you could have the right to run your business, to make your own decisions, even to make mistakes. That's what freedom means. Rick picked up his Medal of Honor ceremony program from the table. Today, 375 family members of fallen servicemen and women sat in the audience while I received this medal. They'll never see their sons, daughters, husbands, wives come home. They paid the ultimate price. He gestured around the room. Everyone here has lost friends in service to this country. We've all been to funerals where we folded flags for widows and orphans. We've all heard taps played over graves of people we loved. Brad was openly crying now. So when you see a veteran, any veteran, remember that they volunteered to write a blank check to America, payable up to and including their life. Whether their uniform is new or old, whether they're young or old, whether they're in a restaurant or on a street corner, they've earned your respect. Rick walked toward the door, and the sea of veterans parted before him. And Mr. Hoffman? Brad looked up through his tears. Thank you for your apology, even though you haven't given it yet. As Rick reached the door, every veteran in the restaurant came to attention. The salute was crisp, precise, and simultaneous. 200 right hands snapped to 200 foreheads in perfect unison. Rick returned the salute, then walked outside into the Memorial Day evening. The parking lot was still full of motorcycles and veterans. As Rick emerged, they too came to attention and rendered honors to the Medal of Honor recipient who had just taught everyone present a lesson in dignity and grace. Gunny Rodriguez was the last to leave the restaurant. He approached Brad, who was still standing in shock among the empty tables. Sir, Gunny said quietly, that man in there. He could have ended your career with one phone call. He could have destroyed your business with one social media post. Instead, he protected your dignity while you were attacking his. Brad nodded, unable to speak. That's what real heroes do, Gunny continued. They protect people, even people who don't deserve it. Remember that. As the last motorcycle pulled out of the parking lot, Brad Hoffman stood alone in his restaurant, surrounded by customers who had witnessed something they would never forget. The teenager who had been filming approached the counter. Excuse me, he said to Brad, but I recorded that whole thing. Do you want me to delete it? Brad looked at the young man for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Post it. Everyone should see what I just learned." The video would go viral within hours, but not for the reasons Brad expected. It wouldn't be about his mistake or his ignorance. It would be about Rick Castellanos, a true American hero who responded to hatred with grace, to insult with education, and to humiliation with honor. And every Memorial Day thereafter, Murphy's Grill would be filled with veterans from across the country, coming to eat at the restaurant where a Medal of Honor recipient had shown them all what it really means to serve with dignity.